So welcome everyone to Language and Learning by Jeff Buck and to this episode of Language Learning Around the World. This is interview number 20, and I'm really excited to welcome again today's special guest, Patrick T. Randolph and Master Gable from the USA. Today we're going to talk about Patrick's paper, Creative Writing. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Just really briefly, Patrick lives in the USA. He and his family live in Nebraska. He's an ESL teacher and lecturer with 28 years of experience. He has a master's in applied English linguistics. He's an experienced independent researcher, editor, and materials writer. He's a YouTuber. And if you want to learn more about him and hear about his paper on teacher burnout, you can check out our previous interview. So, creative writing. We're going to talk about your 2023 paper entitled Breathing Enlightenment and Necessary Change into English Language Programs with Creative Writing. So in your paper, you say creative writing styles are developed internally from within the student's own personhood, whereas academic writing styles are external in nature. That is, they are often a forced style of writing based on an assigned textbook or an ESL program agenda. So what can you tell us about academic writing?
Okay. All right. A lot there. Actually, I want to make it clear that I love both academic writing
Right.
and creative writing. And so just to start off, it's a beautiful marriage that the two can have if they can be taught almost in the same semester, or one hand washing the other with a little bit of creative writing and a little bit of academic writing. But to answer your question, so academic writing essentially it's kind of formulaic. You've got the genres are basically like essays, research papers, lit reviews, sort of publishing or published articles in the various journals, dissertations, theses, things like that. The thing with academic writing, it's often defined as formal and unbiased, clear and precise. I read a lot of articles that don't quite match that, but the problem I saw right off the beginning when I started teaching ESL with academic writing is, like you mentioned with creative writing, it's coming from within. So if you're telling a story about maybe the first experience that you had cooking with your mom in the kitchen, or your dad in the kitchen, or the family baking bread, that's coming from within inside. And so the students already have ownership of that material and they can write about it. But oftentimes academic writing, you get these sort of esoteric topics for these poor students that are coming from different cultures, and the topics themselves don't really have a relation to who they are. And so now they're struggling with the topic, a new language that they're trying to command, and lack of vocabulary. So all that kind of really factors into a complex world for them. But academic writing, to answer your question real quickly, yeah, it's just basically it's formulaic. For you're writing an essay, you've got your introduction, your body, and conclusion, and then even within that, oftentimes, it's taught with a paragraph has a lead in, a topic sentence, some kind of bridge that takes you to the reason, and then an example and conclusion. And one problem with that too is sometimes students just latch onto that. And they
Yeah.
think, okay, that's the paragraph. That's the only kind of paragraph I can write, when there are multiple kinds of paragraphs. But I guess to define it in one word or two, you'd say, it's a formal, unbiased writing based on sources.
Okay.
So,
And regarding creative writing, here's your definition from your paper. Creative writing is a way of embracing, observing, experiencing, thinking, and writing about the past, present, and future through tapping into one's soul, spirit, mind, body, brain, consciousness, and art of mindfulness. Creative writing is a holistic activity that includes using emotions, senses, memories, ideas, experiences, and insights in order to learn from these, as well as learn from one's immediate and surrounding environment. That is, creative writing is a state of mind and a way of life. It is highly observation focused, which allows for constant growth. So talk more about creative writing for us, Patrick.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, a friend of mine from Michigan who I worked with on creative writing together, he said you're the only person I can think of that defines creative writing as a state of being. And I think it's helpful to look at it that way because when you um, wherever you're at, you're sitting on a park bench or you're waiting for a bus or um, you're in class and you're looking at a student smile or the sunlight kind of crawling through the window and through the floor. Every moment of our life, I think, can be a moment of creative writing. And as a poet, I think I always ask myself, am I really writing the poems, or is there like a spirit next to me, like whispering things into my ear, saying, "Hey, look at that, now write about that," And so, in my intro, I'm still struggling with getting this next book of poems
Oh,
together.
wow.
But in the introduction, I've actually made that statement that I don't, these are my poems I've written down, but I don't know if they're really my poems because who knows if there's a ghost out there saying, "Hey, look at that, think about this." There are all these things out there that I don't think we can completely say, "Oh, that can't happen." But at any rate, yeah, with creative writing, I think more. We've got a word. I don't know if we mentioned this before, but we've got a word at home that we're not allowed to use, and that's boring or boredom. So our 12-year-old daughter is forbidden to say that word because I tell her, the human brain takes in 11 million bits of information per second. Now, consciously, I think it's only like 45 to 50, but still, that's a massive amount. And if that's what our life is like with all this coming in, boredom is a total myth because there's just too much out there. And so with creative writing, I think what it does is two things, if I could just define in those two things, it really allows the students to play with language, which
Mhm.
I think we often forget. So they get to play with it, and then they really get to own it. And whatever they're writing, they get excited about. So I've had students from either quantum physics or chemistry or nutrition, whatever the background is, they get excited about creative writing.
Right.
And it's really neat. So, yeah.
Okay. So let's look a little bit more deeply at the two forms of writing and talk about how they're similar and different. So I'll start with this quote and then you can continue. So you write, there are, however, significant differences between the two kinds of writing. The most striking one is that creative writing employs a wide array of genres such as poetry, fables, flash fiction, short stories, novels, drama, and creative nonfiction. In addition, creative writing uses a number of effective tools such as alliteration, dialogue, foreshadowing, metaphors, similes, and symbolism. Creative writing also strongly involves the emotions, the senses, and personal experiences, etc. So can you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah. So and that's I think the big thing is I consider creative writing like these fingers that sort of massage the brain and get it feeling good. Because with academic writing, typically, okay, you do have a certain amount of genres. You've got, compare, contrast, cause and effect papers, description papers, kind of personal bios. That kind of would more lead into creative writing. But in essence, I think it's always kind of funny. Writers and I have always talked about how these sort of formulaic assignments in academic writing are kind of funny because there's not a paper out there where all of those come together. So when you write an article, there's cause and effect, and there's compare and contrast, and there's argumentation, and this and that and the other thing. I mean, I know why they're done at the university, so students can kind of get a feel and become comfortable with the different kinds. But in the end, a lot of it again is usually based on other sources, and then you're sort of paraphrasing and then summarizing and writing about that. Um, so that kind of limits the creativity, although you can add some examples that are creative. But with or with creative writing rather, yeah, you've just got you've got multiple genres, like you just mentioned a ton right there. And then within those, you've got many. So like you've got poetry, which is a genre, but then you've got haiku, and you've got the sonnet, and you've got couplets, and you've got quatrains, and you've got all these different kinds. Um, so um, the whole thing is with creative writing too, with academic writing, both of them, the key is you're writing clearly. So whether it's academic writing or creative writing, you need to be clear. Um, in order to convey whatever thoughts those are. But with creative writing, again, you can kind of play with alliteration and you can play with foreshadowing and you can kind of develop things. Another thing, I mean, I guess when I write both, I kind of let the flow of consciousness go. With academic writing, I do have to have a little more strict outline, so I can kind of stay on track.
Right.
But I just I'm trying to work on this piece that's a little, I don't know how you would classify it. It's a short novel type, but it brings in a lot of sort of weirdness um, about time and space, and it's very spiritual in a way. But with that, I'll just start writing, let's say 11 at night, and by 11:30, my mind has gone in all sorts of different directions. But at the same time, it's maintained clarity and a flow. But it's just kind of like flow of consciousness in a way where you can't do that if I'm sitting down writing an article that has to be um, 2,000 words, not over, So, but to answer, go back to your question. So both of them, they both have to be clear, right? For the reader. And then they both have to be coherent. They both have to communicate ideas. They both have to have good grammar and syntax. But where I think creative writing starts to tip the scale is, again, it's creative. You can often develop your own style, have ownership, and you can have a few more innovative thoughts with creative writing. I mean, granted, you can have that with academic writing too. You can bring in your own ideas. But with creative writing, I think there's more innovation in your development as a writer. So
Yeah, and so with that background now that we've just covered, let's talk about what I think is the heart of your paper, and that is, why is there a need for creative writing in English language teaching?
right. Okay. Yeah, it's a great question because how it started was, I'll just give you a little anecdote, and that's where it all came to fruition. Two cases actually. So when I was teaching in Japan, um, I asked all the teachers I was team teaching with, could we do a poetry unit and then make it exciting and so have a little contest and whatnot. And they said, look, our kids can't write poetry in Japanese. Please don't let them do it in English or make them do it in English. And I said, are you kidding? This is a great time for them to let their creativity go. And I said, can we just try it once? And then if it doesn't work, I'll be okay with it. And we can let it pass. Well, that was our first attempt at it was in 1994, and the teachers were so excited about what they produced. For the next 5 years, we implemented that unit in our classes. And so I held that little light in my head. And when I got back to the States and I was teaching at a university, I was working with a bunch of Saudi students. Um, and it wasn't all Saudi students. I had some Mexican students, Saudi students, Korean students, and Japanese students. It was a mix. But they all had one issue with we were just working on paragraphs at the time, basic paragraphs. And they really had a hard time developing examples um, to sort of support their statements. It was a statement, a reason for that, and then the paragraphs were real weak. There's no development in it. And I asked the director at the time, can we take a week off and do some creative writing where they're writing about things that they know, they're writing about things that they have control over and interesting things.
Yeah.
And she said, yeah, it's a semester system, knock yourself out. So we went and we started with the 6 word novel, which is, it's a novel, it's basically a story, but in 6 words, right? And so they had fun with that. And then we went into just descriptive, like I would give them, it's midnight and your candle is flickering slightly and it's just gone out. What happens next? And then they would write these little descriptive things. And I was really impressed with how they described these various situations that I gave them. And then at the end of the week, they wanted to do more. And I said, well, actually, we've got to get back now to academic writing. I said, oh, one more week, one more week. I said, well, we'll kind of we'll touch back with creative writing, but next week we got to get back to our paragraphs and essays. And it was amazing when we got back. I gave them an assignment over the weekend, and the structure of the paragraph slowly but surely really became developed within a week. I mean, they were giving nice examples now, and before, for example, it was I'll just give a an example from memory. It was something like one of the most important reasons that you have to focus on driving while on the road as you don't want to have an accident. For example, like my uncle did. That was it. You
Yeah.
know? Whereas later, when we developed it as driving requires a lot of attention. One is you don't want to get into an accident. For example, years ago, my uncle, who was on his phone and driving at the same time, and then he went into detail about this horrendous thing that had happened to him. And so I thought, and it was, I mean, I got goosebumps reading the kid's
Wow.
paragraph. And so I thought, okay. And I went back to my director and I said, can I implement more creative writing as we go along? And she said, yeah, no one's really done that, but I don't see an issue why you can't. And then it became the kids did such a nice job. We actually had a unit where they wrote some poems and just flash fiction. So it'd be like a story in 200 words type of
Okay.
thing. And at the end of the semester, we had a poetry and short story reading that we invited the whole campus to, and it was the first time in the whole history of the university that they had international students reading their work. And then
Wow.
from that, our my director said, "Hey, would you like to do a capstone class?" And it would be a creative writing seminar for the highest level students. And I said, "Oh gosh, that would be awesome." And so it took off after that.
Yeah,
So
that's
yeah.
great. And you talk about problems that English language learners face when they try to do academic writing, such as limited proficiency in English, a lack of understanding of the rules, problems doing research, etc. So can you talk about that for a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to, I would say, three things. We kind of touched on them before. They come here from whatever country, or even those that have lived here for a year and done a year of high school. They're still kind of struggling with the whole thing. One, it's not their native language, and so they don't understand all the nuances, right? And so they're struggling with the language, and with academic writing, now we're telling them, oh, okay, you've got to write on these topics and in this formulaic way, and so now there's two more hurdles that they've got to get over. Whereas with academic writing, if you give them like three topics and say, okay, you can write on one of these three, and they'll latch on to them because it's usually something personal. It's like, an
Creative
issue they
writing,
had.
academic writing.
What's that?
Creative or academic writing?
Oh, I suppose you could do both. You could give three topics and they could pick one for with the academic writing, though, again, it's going to be a topic that they might not be familiar with.
Right.
But one that students have always loved that I've given them just as a starting for creative writing is describe a time in your childhood or even teenage life that was a real issue um, and caused a problem, and then you grew through that and it became a beautiful memory. And there's one that I have. It was a phenomenal paper or short story about this girl who hadn't seen her best friend in a long time, and her best friend was kind of poor, and so she brought a vase for her, and the best friend almost defriended her because it's like, why are you bringing gifts for me? I thought our friendship was the gift, and now you're just giving me some material thing that has no significance. And so they had this fight, and then they gradually worked through it, and it was a great little short story on how their friendship had been so solid for these years, but then it kind of shifted, and then they got back on track. And so what I'll do is I'll give them um, topics that they can relate to.
Right.
And that's one of the hurdles is the academic topics. Some of them are good, but so many of them, you wonder who's writing these textbooks and who's writing the material because there's such a distinct gap between the student and the topic. But with creative writing, like you had mentioned in the intro, it comes from within. They're pulling from experiences that they know about, and it's that
Right.
whole mantra in writing: write about what you know.
Right.
Um, which I think that doesn't always have to apply. You can always write about things you don't know, but once you
Right.
start researching them and knowing them, then um, that's when the beauty kicks in.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think in general, when you're learning a foreign language, it's easier to work with topics that you're already familiar with,
Right, right.
whether it's oral or written. Um, you also write in your paper, for decades now, I believe that directors at academic English programs and intensive English programs have misunderstood the essence and value of creative writing. And you say that ironically, there is, on the other hand, a great deal of support for creative writing in other departments, non-ELT departments, business, nursing, engineering, etc. So what can you tell
Right.
us about that?
Yeah. So years ago, I was working on a paper, and I thought, okay, let me let me see who supports creative writing and who doesn't. And I was literally blown away because professors in religious studies departments, philosophy, really the MBA, I mean, they were huge proponents of it, engineering, nursing programs, medical programs. And then it made complete sense to me because they said, we like to begin our classes with something the students can know and relate to. And so we have them write a creative piece, whether it's a poem or a piece of flash fiction or even just a little short story. And then based on that, for example, I'll give you one concrete example. At Western Michigan, University of Western Michigan, an engineering professor, civil engineering, he has his students write about a little village in Guatemala that's having a water issue. And the students have to solve the sanitation problem through a short story based on a family. And so they write about the family, the trials and tribulations that they've been through, and then how they overcome that. And then based on that short story, the class kind of takes off into the math and science of it all.
Hmm.
And I started thinking, oh, that's great, because I remember when I was an undergrad, our philosophy professor, who is this amazing man, Gary Cook from Beloit College, he let us, instead of writing essays on Leibniz or Spinoza or Descartes, he would allow us to create dialogues like the Platonic dialogues. And so I did one with Leibniz meeting Marilyn Monroe, and they met down at a dock in in Hamburg, and they struck up a conversation about his monadology. And to this day, I remember Leibniz so much better now because he had this dialogue with Marilyn Monroe, this kind of creative, um, fictitious, but he allowed us to do that, and
Nice.
all of us really grappled with the topics. And then once we personalized it through creative writing, wow, we really got a hold of it in an amazing way. So yeah. So yeah, to answer your question, what I did is I did a little survey, and I contacted multiple departments across the U.S., and I asked them questions like, do you agree that creative writing should be taught more in ESL programs? Do you use creative writing? What are the benefits of creative writing? And the response for positive views on creative writing and uses was overwhelming. In other departments, so I'm talking, MBA and philosophy and religious studies and engineering and
Right.
sociology, whatever, biology classes. So it's being used. And then I would go back to my own department wherever I was at, and they'd say, "Oh no, creative writing is fluff writing, and there's no value to it." And I'm like, "Are you serious? Well, here's the value over in the civil engineering department." Oh, really? But it was still a hard thing to sell here. It's really hard. Yeah. So you kind of have to
Yeah.
do it privately. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so how does implementing creative writing in an ESL or EFL um, program change learners' attitudes towards writing, and how does it actually improve their writing?
Okay. Yeah, it's a great question. I can use SIU, University of Southern Illinois Carbondale, as a perfect example, because the students were having issues with writing just basic paragraphs and essays at level 5. And I asked the director, what are they doing in level 4? And essentially they were doing the same thing. And I thought, wow, so we're repeating the content, repeating the exercises, and they're not developing that much. And so I asked her, I said, what's the possibility of gutting out level 4 before they get to level 5 and doing a creative writing seminar? So we started with, and she okayed it. We gave it a pilot try, and then it really took off. And so basically they started with, we began with a paragraph, so they got a good understanding of how to write a nice solid paragraph, and we used that as our critiquing device. So when they would write a poem, they would write a paragraph about the good points and points that might need work on the poem through the paragraph. But we worked on paragraphs, short stories, dialogue, kind of a little essay that was more like a um, autobiographical essay on, again, an issue that they had dealt with, and then were able to meet the challenge and solve the problem. And so we did we wrote creative letters. So if there was an issue, um, the students would write a letter to somebody saying this is how we believe that the issue could be solved or the problem could be solved. So we did a lot of different kinds of creative writing. At the end of the semester, they took the exam, the writing exam. And normally the success rate was maybe 50 to 60%, of those that would move on. When after doing the creative writing, it went up to 85 to 90%. And the teachers that were reading the exit exams were like, wow, where did these essays come from? And I said, well, they're not just writing formulaic stuff like they were before and having trouble with it. They start with one, sentences and then work up to paragraphs and then develop stories, and just the idea that they're using so many different kinds of techniques and different kinds of writing. So poetry is a lot different than prose, and prose is different than, say, dialogue. Um, and like I said, it's just like massaging the brain. And so again, I think it came down to they were having fun with writing, and they actually found writing to be enjoyable.
Mm.
And I think one of the best examples I have is during spring break, I received email from a student of mine who was flying out to California, and he wrote to me saying, "Dear Patrick, just a quick note. I wanted to tell you that while flying across the U.S., I felt empty, and something was missing from my life, and I realized I didn't have my notebook and I couldn't write. And so as soon as I landed, I went to some little stationery store and got a notebook for $2, which was expensive at the airport. But now I have it in my hotel room, and I'm going to continue writing for you
Wow,
and me during break." And I thought, oh my gosh, yeah, nice.
that's great.
So,
Um, and we talked about this a little bit before we started the interview. What should students who want to improve their creative writing do in terms of reading other people's creative writing? What should they be reading?
okay. Oh yeah, great question. Yeah, I mean, just like anything, I tell my volleyball players, make sure you're watching a lot of video on the best volleyball players so you can, mimic that and become better yourself. And I think every writer has their favorite writers that they initially kind of mimic in a way, and then they develop their own style and their own way of writing, about certain things. And so I would recommend finding, your favorite poets, your favorite short story authors, uh, novelists, and reading as much as possible, because it's the whole mantra. Again, the more you read, the better you write.
Right.
Just because you pick up different ways of viewing things, and then you kind of assimilate those, and then kind of go on beyond what you've read, and develop your own creativity and your own style. So
Yeah, and you also talk about the neuroscience and cognitive psychology behind creative writing, dealing with emotions, flexibility, variation, personalization, and enjoyment.
right.
So, can you tell us about that?
Yeah. There's this really neat neuroscientist out there now who puts a lot of weight into emotions. Um, uh, uh, um, she's got a really neat book. It's basically called the Emotions of Learning, in the brain. Imordino Yang is her name. And uh, there's one quote that I think it's on page 18, because I've read it so many times that I love it. And she says that basically the human brain can't learn anything, if the emotions aren't involved. And I completely understand that and agree with it, because I always give little surveys for my students. And one that I gave years ago, it was on emotions and learning, and can they learn without emotion? And I think it was 100% of the students, and I did it in 3 classes. They said, unless there's some kind of emotional link, I'm not going to pick up the material. There's got to be,
Right.
whether it's humor, surprise, fear,
Yeah.
uh, happiness, whatever it is. There's something that's going to link, um, the content with the emotion, and they're going to remember it easier, I think. So, I mean, I think it all goes back to, us on the Serengeti, as a development of a race, that however how we learn, there was some emotion tagged to that, whether it was
Right.
happiness or fear or excitement or or whatever. Yeah.
And my final question is regarding autonomous learners. So if a student, for whatever reason, is working on their own to improve their English skills and they want to work in creative writing, what can they do if they don't have a teacher to help them?
Right, right. I mean, right now, fortunately, because of all the online little classes here and there, they could just go to YouTube and type in, um, class in poetry, and
Yeah.
there are little things that they could watch. But I would say, just write, like we talked about before, read a few things, um, think about it, and then experiment on their own. Pick a type of poem like the Japanese tanka or haiku I like because they're structured in the sense that like the haiku is 5 7 5, so you're kind of limited to what you can do, and the tanka is sort of amplification of that with 5 7 5 7 7 syllables. So it's a 5 line poem as opposed to the haiku that's a three. But take something like that where you've got to be creative, work on images, and at the same time kind of work within the syllable count. And then just experiment with that, work on a few. I remember when I first came home, I think I was in second grade, and I told my mom and dad, I said, we have this really weird, silly assignment that we have to write a haiku, and I don't like haiku, and I don't understand them. And my dad said, "Oh, haiku. Hey, you're so lucky to have this assignment." And the way he described it and the way he helped me, I thought, Dad, why didn't you teach us this at school? Because he made it sound so exciting. And after my dad explained about the whole idea behind haiku and what a haiku is, I couldn't stop writing them. I mean, to this day, I'm working on them. And for that year, actually, I think in second grade, I made my dad a little booklet of haiku for Christmas. And but yeah, just take something that interests you, I think, and then experiment with it, and then just um, go crazy with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Patrick, for sharing your expertise and your experience regarding creative writing. How can people contact you and how can they access your material?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I suppose you can leave my email
Mhm.
address up. It's creative.ideas.forenglish at
Right.
Gmail. And then on YouTube, YouTube is a great resource because we've got like 72 videos now on everything from grammar, writing prompts, creative writing, mindfulness, volleyball signals, and everything else.
Right.
So, but we've got a bunch. We've got a bunch of short videos recently too that are under a minute, and I'll have the viewer just watch the video, and then in the comment section, I've got a bunch of writing prompts, so they could use those as well to get themselves started. So,
Okay. Perfect. So thank you everyone for watching. Be sure to check out Patrick's YouTube channel. Like he said, he has some videos on creative writing exercises, and also check out my other interviews in this series, Language Learning Around the World, including Patrick's first interview. So thank you and have a great day.
you too. Thank you.